Hi, my name is Chris Darin, and I welcome you to our presentation, Collaborating to Facilitate Client Opportunities for Hope and Connection. We will be joined very soon by Greta Daly, Therapeutic Counsellor at Gamblers Help Southern with the Better Health Network, and Benita Cohen, Senior Social Worker and Clinical Family Therapist at Gambling Mind. So I'd like to start off with an acknowledgement of country. So Alfred Health acknowledges the Bunurong, and Wurundjeri Woi people of the Eastern Kulin Nation as traditional owners and custodians and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to lands and waterways and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people. So a little bit more about Gambling Minds before we jump in. So our team was established in 2010, and that was in response to research that found quite a large proportion of patients presenting to Alfred Emergency Psychiatric Services also had a history of harmful gambling behaviours. And for many of those people presenting, they were actually presenting in crisis, often with suicidal ideation or suicide attempts, and were expressing quite high levels of harm. And as a result, our service was created and has been since funded by the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation, who also fund the Gamblers Help Services. So you can find a little bit more about our service on our website, gamblingminds.org.au. But generally, what we do is provide statewide service across the state of Victoria. And we predominantly work with Gamblers Help Services, and we provide mental health expertise, access to specialised assessments with our psychiatrist. We can provide secondary consultations, and we also provide education and training. We work closely with mental health services as well, and we provide training around education around gambling harms, and we're trying to upskill and educate and support clinicians working in mental health services to be able to talk a bit more about gambling and to provide support to those that identify that they are experiencing gambling harms. So a little bit about Gamblers Help Southern. So they are Victoria's largest Gamblers Help service, and they work with anyone experiencing gambling harm, including affected others. They provide free and confidential therapeutic and financial counselling, and they provide community education, venue support, and do a really great schools program. So you can find out again more about Connect Health and Gamblers Help Southern by following the website, and we'll put links on all the links that we mentioned during the presentation. So we just wanted to start and highlight that gambling harm extends much beyond financial concerns and financial harm. So there's 7 main categories that we often sort of focus on, and they include the ones that you can see on your screen here at the top. And along those sort of, amongst those 7 harms, we often see different types of severity or levels of risk that people can experience. Unfortunately, many people start off not experiencing many problems with gambling, or they might experience low-level issues. But over time, these can increase, and they can go from having very low or limited or few problems to having experiencing lots of difficulties in amongst all of these domains that are listed at the top. This is a spectrum, so people can move up and people can move down this rating, and often people move down with the great level of support that Gamblers Help Services provide. So those 7 domains, we often also think and consider them that they can be general, and so they can occur day to day, week to week. So those are minor harms that occur after a person begins gambling. We unfortunately often see clients and people accessing services once they've reached crisis point. So that's when issues are severe enough that a person believes they might have an issue with gambling, and that's when they might reach out for support. So it could be through a GP, could be through a support worker. Often lots of people contact Gamblers Help and the Gamblers Help helpline. So lots of supports available. But as we'll touch on, it can still be quite a big barrier for people accessing supports. And also the legacy issues, so the issues that can affect long-term families and individuals, even if the person is no longer gambling. So considering sort of particularly sort of financial impacts can have those legacy impacts. Relationship breakdowns might have a legacy impact on children. So it's not just the here and now, they can have long-lasting effects. And this infographic here was from a study that showed that the relationship issues was the biggest factor for people to consider reaching out for help. So when they were identifying that their relationship was struggling or issues in their relationship, that was the biggest driver for people to seek support. So relationships was 25%, health 20%, and emotional was just below 20% on 18%. Want to acknowledge that gambling can be the only issue or challenge lots of people face, but they regularly occur with other issues and other disorders and other mental health issues. So this is a small table, and you can see here. So very frequently we might see other substance use or alcohol or smoking, nicotine use, commonly amongst people who gamble. And we also see lots of people accessing services who might be experiencing depressive episodes or depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms. And the personality, that covers sort of all personality disorders that have been diagnosed. And these are for people, and these stats are for those people who are accessing services. So there's still a huge unknown about people who aren't accessing services and what those barriers are for those individuals. Just to summarise, 75% of people who seek treatment for gambling disorder have comorbid mental health issues, with mood and substance use disorder as the most common. And as we know, the high levels of harm that people experience often means it's more difficult to engage, and which reduces the positive outcomes. So by identifying and engaging early on, and we're likely to make it easier for people to engage and get better outcomes and reduce the harms along the way. So gambling harms is really quite far behind, I suppose, in lots of other public health issues, such as smoking or alcohol use and substance use, family violence. Whilst gambling is absolutely everywhere, we do lack, I think, the understanding as a society and community that there's lots of harms that occur from gambling and how it affects the whole of the community. There's been recommendations recently, and there's background papers here, and that was produced by the Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation around trying to promote gambling as a public health issue. And that makes it everybody's business to be able to support those that are struggling with gambling. And it makes other organisations of roles, Centrelink, lots of different organisations take notice that gambling is not just somebody who can't control impulses. It really is an addiction. It really is impactful, and it should be considered when they are engaging with those individuals. So part of the public health approach is collaboration and working together. So having different organisations working together, supporting individuals. These three areas are the places that we had identified where Gambling Minds and Gamblers Help work really, really closely together. So having a whole of community approach, and these are examples of how we meet those targets. But building the capacity of individuals, families, and community to better identify and respond to needs of problem gamblers. So we wanted to highlight our work that we do through single session family consultation. So Benita Cohen, our family therapist, and Greta are going to talk a bit more around the process of single session family consultation and how we have implemented that within our teams. I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
So there's a little bit of a paradox that despite so much acceptance and even encouragement of gambling, given the advertising, it's really stigmatized in our society. And so the research has found that it's actually even more stigmatized than many mental illnesses and substance use issues. And that there's also often self-stigma, which can be a barrier to disclosure and then also a barrier to treatment and recovery. So if we think about this iceberg metaphor, in Gamblers Help Services, we would typically see things like the gambling behaviours and all that involves, which, is often a lot of debt and stress and also, significant link to mental health issues because of that stress. But it can be a bit of a chicken or an egg and bidirectional as well, because in other services, people might present for other issues, but actually the gambling underneath is what's really leading to perhaps say substances as a coping mechanism or potentially family violence as well. And gambling is actually easier to conceal physically, visibly than other issues. So, we know that gambling can be a coping mechanism and it can temporarily relieve pain and stress, but it really does add to that stress cycle. People who are gambling often really struggle to be truly open and vulnerable with the people in their lives due to the fear of abandonment. So that's why we really want to talk about this and talk about the work, the relationship work that's an important part of gambling. Gamblers Help Support Services. So the belief at the core of shame is that what we're harbouring, what we're keeping underneath is so dreadful that if anyone found out, we'd be rejected and banished from our human companionship. But it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So as most of us are aware of Brené Brown's work, shame can feel like there's something wrong with me. And in order for therapeutic work to be incorporating that understanding of shame, we need that self-compassion. So society tries to shame people out of addiction, but of course it's completely counterproductive, and shame can't survive empathic connection. So that's the importance of relationships and co-regulating. But vulnerability is a really important aspect. So we have to kind of support clients to understand their own self-stigmatizing beliefs so that they can have hope and trust in their recovery journey. And one other thing we like to kind of touch upon is that in the work that we do as counsellors, unconditional positive regard is very often an important component of therapeutic work, and we really care about our clients. But we also acknowledge that it's very often harmful to the other people in the client's life, particularly children. And so, that comes up in some of the cases we will bring up later. So we're really holding that care for the person gambling as well as other people. And so these collaborative approaches that we have the opportunity to use are really important for working with that.
Single Session was initially developed by Moshe Talman, and in his book in 1990, he first wrote about using Single Session as a way of making the most of our time. Research at that point showed that many clients actually only attended for one session, no matter what the therapist's orientation or approach. And Moshe Talman demonstrated how therapists could turn the single session encounter into a positive therapeutic experience. We find that although a single session has been used and expanded really across the globe in very, very different diverse ways, there are some key features that we want to highlight. The first is that these sessions are usually time limited. They may be one-off, but they are often followed by an offer, at least for a follow-up or for more one-off sessions. There's always an active discussion, and all voices are encouraged. So the idea of everybody being actively involved in a discussion from the perspective of thinking about what's best and how to move forward is a very powerful aspect of this approach. We also use a reflective approach, and this involves the therapists sharing their reflections and perspectives together in the session so that the the family or the clients have the opportunity to hear a whole number of different perspectives.
I just thought I'd add that we actually got to contribute to this book that's on the screen as well. We co-authored a chapter following a presentation that we did at a single session conference. And I think what we also just wanted to mention here as well, that that in terms of family violence, that, you know, single session would services may not necessarily be the most suitable, and we might refer to a specialist family violence service in those situations.
Yep. Thank you. So the idea of single session is very much a flexible one. As you can hear, it depends very much on the circumstances of the client, the particular family dynamics, the particular kind of location, organisation, counsellors, and even the mode of engagement. So you know, it may be face to face, it may be you know, online, or, you know, occasionally it may even be over the telephone. We always ensure, though, that the client and the family's needs are at the centre of the session, and we take a collaborative perspective. So it's not the counsellors who come in as the experts. It's very much about facilitating a safe environment, using the strengths of the family and the understanding that the family know best, and that they have an active role to play in coming to some conclusions and benefiting from the session as best as possible. The aims of the session are really set before the session, but it does depend on the particular goals that the family set. Most of the families are referred to us by the Gamblers Help counsellors, but not necessarily so. And depending on if the families are seeing counsellors, how actively involved they are in their counselling work, you know, we may tailor a session around those needs and make recommendations as well. So the process that we use at this stage, it has changed quite considerably over time as we've become more familiar and more comfortable with our own way of providing this approach. Is that we will receive a referral, most commonly from Gamblers Help counsellors, whether financial or therapeutic counsellors. But it may also be from a GP, it may be a self-referral, it does vary quite considerably. And we will make contact with the referrer and also make contact with the client with the written consent that's been provided, and have a discussion about what the aims of a potential single session may be. We'll have some discussion about the way that single session works, how it might benefit this particular family, and also have a discussion about whether single session seems to be the best way. There may be times where some ongoing counselling may be more suitable, for instance, some couple counselling, or it may be that the family have had no experience of counselling and just want to kind of almost have a taste of what a counselling session, you know, may be like. So we'll have a discussion and then make some arrangements around making contact with the family and getting consent from all members that will be present. This involves sending out a pre-session questionnaire where each family member is asked to complete a set of 10 questions that gives some indication of what they are most concerned about. It also rates the degree of concern, so it has a solution-focused kind of orientation, and it asks the client to spell out how things may look if the worries were, you know, resolved. So it gets people to start thinking in strengths-based ways about how they could move forward and to take an active role in the process. We do not, you know, insist that pre-session questionnaires are completed. It really does depend on the family, and we will spend time at the beginning of that session making sure that everyone is comfortable with the issues that they've raised, the main things they want to focus on, and that everyone is comfortable for us to sort of settle on a couple of key issues that then form the agenda of our family session. We will invite counsellors to the session, who are usually the referrers, and have a discussion with those counsellors around whether they want to observe the session and not be actively involved, whether they would like to take a reflective role, and sometimes counsellors, due to having an alliance with one family member, prefer just to observe. Sometimes they would like to reflect and be involved in sharing their perspectives toward the end of the session. But the session really involves two clinicians co-facilitating the family discussion and making sure that we stay on track and that we keep to time. We will ask for reflections toward the end of a session and then ask the family what feels useful for them around the reflections they've heard and what steps they may take after the session in order to move forward. We also make contact at a later stage to check that the family are on track and to ask whether they may want to have a follow-up session.
Okay.
I wonder if I could ask you, Greta, about if you refer, at what point you refer, and how that works for you with the clients you work with.
Yeah, I think I've tended to refer when there's some stuckness. That's been probably the main sort of decision-making aspect for me. So obviously with Gamblers Help, we often have sort of ongoing long-term work with our clients, and whether that's individuals and couples. And yeah, the single session consultation has been really helpful for when, what's been happening is there's a fair bit of distress or stress. There's a space for, maybe a new, fresh perspective or a second or third opinion, or just that collaborative process. Also, sometimes when the partner hasn't wanted to attend as an affected other for their own counselling or for couples work, so they're willing to do it as this one-off. That's been really useful for referring as well. So yeah, quite varied, but certainly when there's that stuckness in terms of the relationships functioning, that's when it's particularly useful.
I wonder also about what some Gamblers Help counsellors have said around being able to have the opportunity to sort of expand your view of the work that you're doing, so that you are able to hear other family members' perspectives.
Yes.
And the work that the single session focuses on is very much led by the family, and it's very much a sort of a client-centered approach. So depending on what clients want, it does happen sometimes that the clients prefer for their counsellors not to be present, and that would of course always be respected. But it does often deepen the ongoing work for clients and their counsellors, having heard the sort of experience expanded and having been able to observe something of the relational dynamics.
And even just sitting back and observing our clients in general, because we're normally engaged in our sessions with them. So being in that observer role allows for a bit more space to really sort of see some patterns that we may have potentially missed along the way.
Right. It does happen sometimes that the counsellor may request a secondary consultation after the single session. So it also sort of allows for some ongoing discussion and reflection together, potentially without the family even being involved, as things change, as the work develops. We have talked about the intake assessment to some extent. I'm wondering about discussing current issues and challenges. We do attempt to offer the single sessions in a timely way, so that the family don't have to wait for too long, and we would try to be quite flexible in for instance, offering an after-hours appointment, or offering, an online appointment if it's very difficult to actually come in to meet at the Gamblers Help organisation or at our office. But there have been times where a session has been stalled because one family member wants to have a session, but another family member is still ambivalent about it. And there have been some instances where we've landed up having a single session with some of the family system because there's been a family member who feels very uncomfortable about attending. So I'm thinking of an example of meeting with parents who've really wanted to discuss an adult child's gambling, and the child has felt ambivalent about coming in with parents, and we've been able to have one session with parents and a second session sometime later with the whole family. So depending on what the family hope to achieve, we do try to be quite flexible. This is an example of the pre-session questionnaire that we send out, and it is. It prompts some information that we're seeking, but it can be there is space for clients to add in extra issues, and it can be something that can be done as a family. It's usually done, per individual, but we have had some couples and families completing it all together, and it can be very interesting to highlight where families are, say, worried in the same way, or where some family members are very worried about an issue, others are not worried at all. So looking at some of the similarities, looking at some of the differences can be very, very helpful and useful to reflect on in the session.
Yeah, and they also quite often document what they hope might be occurring differently as an outcome of the session too, don't they?
They do, yes, that's right. That's right. Okay, so the session, the flexibility around seeing families in person or in a shared location or working over telehealth has really varied enormously over time. Probably pre-COVID, we were doing less Zoom sessions, although that was something that we offered because our service is statewide, and of course Gamblers Help services are offered across the state. But we have found that we did used to offer more of a sort of traditional reflective team approach where the team was offered in a separate room, and we don't work in that way anymore. We have found that the reflective team sitting in the session has been a lot more helpful, really, and has allowed for people to feel less kind of observed and to actually be able to sort of engage with the with everyone who's part of the session in a very real way, and that seems to have really increased that sort of sense of compassion and safety in the session. I guess although sessions have varied quite considerably, where there may not be a reflective team in some sessions. Some sessions may become more of a discussion around, for instance, mental illness or around addiction, and the focus may differ depending on who's in the room and kind of what the needs are. But we do try to have a uniform response in that we will always check to see that we're on track, make sure that we're discussing the key issues that the family request. We will offer some reflections, even if it's just as the therapists in the room, kind of, and the clinicians offering and sharing some thoughts and experiences of other families in similar circumstances. And at the sort of after post session, we will get in touch and offer a further session or have a discussion about the impact of the single session, and send some feedback about a summary or some key takeaways of that session, so that we reinforce those key messages.
And I guess here we just really want to reiterate that the word single can be a bit of a misnomer, that it is a one-off, but it's not. People can have multiple single sessions with this model.
Exactly.
So here's some families that we've worked with together. So in terms of Gamblers Help Counselling and the Alfred Gambling Minds. So one family we worked with, and in this case we actually did have 3 very different sessions with the same family in terms of both location and outcome. And one of the partners did feel that first session was very unbalanced, and the way we set it up, unfortunately, I think contributed to that. We all took a lot of learning from it. The partner felt very validated, whereas in the second and third session, the third one was on Zoom. It was at the start of the pandemic. They really felt like they were on the same team, and even including their children as part of that team. And just increased understanding of addiction and mental health.
Yes. That first session was unfortunately something that gave us a great opportunity to reflect on and to be really clear about being neutral, and to be very clear about the role of the reflecting team in particular. We were very pleased that the family returned and wanted to have a follow-up session, and it was a really important opportunity to actually explore in more detail the impact of kind of addiction and mental illness, and to really maintain the neutrality so that everyone had equal time and equal opportunity to be heard.
Yeah, and for this family to sort of trust the process. They are still engaged in different ways in our services, and although there's a lot of improvement, say with the things like gambling, there's always a keen interest in self-reflection and really a very loving family, and so always looking for ways to facilitate communication and shared understanding when everyone sees things from different lenses. There is a cultural component in this family as well. So, should we move on, because I know we're probably low on time. So in this the second family we're talking about here, one of them which was my client, had really done a lot of work in individual counselling and made a lot of progress. Was very proud of not gambling, but also self-reflection. Whereas the partner had a lot of stress as well, and did not see counselling as being of benefit. Her focus was on the finances. So this single session model was a great opportunity for her to enter the conversation in this way. And so what came out of the session was there was a revelation that her reason for struggling with trust in terms of the observed change of her partner stopping gambling was based on his father's gambling and his mother's fears about that. So we, the family therapists on the day were able to do some lovely family of origin work, exploring that history and just highlighting how there were those generational differences and changes. So just because the father and son were both gambling, there was actually quite a bit of difference between their behaviours. So the partner went away feeling a lot more secure following that consultation.
And that session was such an important opportunity for the partner to be heard and to articulate the fear that she carried, the experience of seeing that her partner had made progress, but never really having anyone hear how frightened she was and how difficult it had been for her. She had expressed this to her partner, of course, but having a team around truly listening to her words and also asking with interest about her own family history and trying to tease out her own experiences of trust was hopefully a very valuable experience for her. And it did seem to really kind of bring them together as a couple a lot more, so that they were able to kind of really move forward together, whereas they came in from such different paths.
Absolutely. In terms of the third family that we're sharing about here, and just keep in mind that of course we've removed a lot of identifying information and trying to keep it as general as we can. So we had a family from different cultural backgrounds who attended with a teenager, and it really highlighted some differences in parenting style. The teenager was just incredibly articulate, and she spoke very passionately towards her mother about how her mother's behaviour was impacting her, and she expressed, that her hope that she would change, and which sort of linked to increased connection because there was just such a salient disconnect. She exclaimed that she didn't want to be angry with her mum; she wanted to be able to trust her. And this family continued on for some time, and they both expressed change, and really that reconnection with parenting and responsibility, where they sort of perhaps maybe they'd been a bit more focused on their own needs or on the relationship, which was struggling, and things as well. So there was a lot of stress, but that opportunity for the teenager to assert herself was really moving, actually, for everyone involved.
Yeah, it was. It absolutely was. Yeah, and I think that although everyone in that family was struggling in different ways, the ability for them each to hear one another in a focused way. So there was not yelling and screaming. There was discussion, and a sharing of emotion. And while each of them were struggling and in pain, they were able to actually hear that from one another. And while that family continued to have counselling separately, they did also make contact with us further down the track, and we were able to have some secondary consultations with the Gamblers Help counsellors, and to continue to have some involvement as that family made some changes over time for the better. So it was really great to see how powerful that initial session was, and the way that it sort of allowed things to move in a slightly different way forward.
Absolutely. And our last family, just in our reflections here, was a very complex relationship structure. And so one partner who was also my client was a long-term Gamblers Help client and was really trying hard working on the gambling. The partner, they had a loving relationship, but there was some really severe undiagnosed mental illness, as well as some quite complex, significant family expectations in terms of from a practical level linked to the cultural background, but also some complexity around relationship expectations as well. And so, yes, these sessions with this couple felt really important. They, I think we all kind of struggled a little bit to navigate how best to support this couple based on their circumstances, but it was really lovely to have that. And they felt really supported in having, multiple kind of therapists on the day and before and after, really caring about them and wanting to support them through some really complex issues.
Yeah, and I guess just one last comment to make with that, that was a really powerful opportunity for us to work very closely with the Gamblers Help counsellors. There were 2 counsellors involved, and to have ongoing discussions about supporting this family where there was so much complexity. Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of reflecting from the worker perspective as well. So as we've said, the location and room set up, Zoom in the room, in a different room, audio visual stuff, it just really allowed particularly the Gambling Minds team to reflect on models that work more effectively and be flexible. So the key role of, sorry, we're going to say something else about that?
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So, and as well, that therapists are really, need to be very considered and very intentional in the way that we invite participation in the session, really manage the space so that so the clients come away feeling heard and that there's been fairness and that they haven't been disempowered in terms of their voice in the conversation. And obviously, as Benita has talked really clearly about, the pre-session preparation and post-session reflection is a huge part of it, for that verbal and written content to be balanced and collaborative and of course strengths-based, so that the whole process is really therapeutic, rather than just the actual day itself. And it just does provide that safe space for exploration. I always experience it as quite a powerful process of vulnerability in the space that, because of how it's set up to be incredibly safe and navigating that complexity and comorbidities.
Yeah. It's something that does take quite a bit of time. I think that allowing that time, pre-session, the session itself, and then post-session, is something that we found to be extremely important, so that everyone is as prepared as possible. And we are always available to work around the particular needs if more time is needed, to make sure that the second point around clients experiencing perceptions of bias, disempowerment and judgment, that really relates to our first example we gave, and I think that was a very powerful lesson for us, so that we always have in mind the need for people to walk away feeling stronger as a result of the meeting.
Yeah.
Perhaps the key things that we have shared with you today, more than anything, is our belief in using a systemic lens. We want to be able to offer single session as an opportunity or as an approach to further therapeutic work, and to keep in mind the ongoing complex impact of guilt, shame and stigma for individuals and for families, and we have found these family interventions to provide opportunities for the clients we work with, the families and the services, really, to explore gambling and to facilitate conversations of hope and connection.
Yeah. I guess the last point that I wanted to sort of share was, it can seem quite resource intensive having multiple therapists in the room as well as observing, but there really is something special about that power of this collective wisdom and coming together in this way, and it's really compassionate approach. So it does break down some of that defensiveness in the moment. There's that safety. And so even though it's resource intensive, we can find that we might make a bit more progress than we otherwise would. So there's that effectiveness there as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So our last point is just here's information about Gambling Minds, and I'm from Gamblers Help Southern, and there's obviously Gamblers Help services all over Victoria. The phone number for the Gamblers Helpline is 1800 858 858.
Thank you so much. And we will include at the end of this presentation some links and resources, and welcome any questions or any contact, and hope that it's been an invitation and an encouragement to consider a systemic lens and a single session approach.